Ocon has often done something like that, so you could say it's typical Ocon, absolutely stupid. Monaco was always questioned when you drove a Formula One car there. It was always crazy. But that was a good thing, is a good thing, and has to stay that way. Monaco was further proof that the championship is far from decided for Red Bull.
Hello dear Formula One fans and MSM friends, welcome to the Monaco edition of AVD Motorsport-Magazin with Christian Danner, and there he is, Servus Christian.
Yes, hello, it was nice in Monaco I must say, but it's even nicer to talk about it now.
Nice. I'm glad that you're back with us. While our other Christian is on the plane on the way back from Monaco, we have to sweep up the shards or carbon splinters that are still left over from race day. Unfortunately, the race wasn't quite as explosive after that, but we'll come back to that in the course of the show, as well as a very special event that you'll be taking part in this year.
Yes, so let's start with Monaco first. It's a Grand Prix that, let's say, is of worldwide importance, so you just know it, the Monaco Grand Prix in Monte Carlo. It's simply a subject that fascinated me when I was young or as a child. And I have to say, when I was there again now, the fascination has remained.
And the race was fascinating from many a perspective, perhaps not for everyone, but let's take a look at the collision that was a little less in the limelight yesterday than the big Magnussen-Perez-Hülkenberg collision, but which could perhaps have repercussions, namely the internal team collision between the long-time Alpine rivals, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. Let's take a look at the situation. There are really no two opinions, are there, Christian?
Well, it's quite clear that Ocon was pushing, and at some point, of course, always against his own teammate, and at some point he ran over his wheel. So, I mean, that was obviously stupid, far too aggressive, and unfortunately, I would say typical Ocon. I can remember the various events he had with Sergio Perez at Force India and so on. To be honest, that's not possible, and it's just stupid because I think it really doesn't help. And for once, they were actually relatively competitive. They were both in a position to finish in the points and jeopardize something like that. So that's very counterproductive, very destructive towards the team. So from that point of view, I wasn't surprised that the Bruno Famin boss was really angry.
And the stewards saw it the same way. They imposed a penalty. The 10 seconds would be a +5 grid position penalty in the next race. But what seemed a bit strange about the whole story is that this action, this collision, resulted in an investigation, the bigger issue that led to the race being stopped, but not that one. Did that surprise you?
Yes and no. First of all, a quick word about the Ocon incident. Some people were amused by the penalty he received. Yes, how can you punish someone who has retired with a 10-second penalty? That doesn't mean anything. Yes, it does mean something, because if you don't serve it, it means 5 grid positions back in the next race. And perhaps for those who remember, Sergio Perez once got a penalty, the same one, and drove into the pits. Car was damaged, I think it was in England. Red Bull then decided, the car is now retired. Now we're unretiring the car again. Now we send it back on the track, make a pit stop, serve the penalty. Then we're rid of it for next weekend. And that's a procedure that I think is good, because you stick to the same penalty and you don't have the option of simply taking the car out of the race and saying, yes, I'll just stop and it doesn't matter. So that was okay. The consequences of this matter will interest me, because how can I really punish this Ocon now? Actually, as the boss, I have to say, my dear friend, you sit out a race and now Jack Doohan is driving. Period. Then Ocon learns. If he does it differently, just tell him off. That goes in his left ear and out his right ear. And now the question of the big Magnussen-Perez collision. I watched it all very closely, even in slow motion, and nowadays you can shuttle back and forth to see the details. So the question is not so much whether Magnussen shouldn't be punished because he's bad, but the question is, who is guilty of what? Well, of course, Magnussen is at fault because he aggressively approached a place where he wanted to overtake. Dangerous, but that's his right. Perez clearly looked in the rearview mirror and saw that someone was coming. You could see that quite clearly, and then he didn't turn left to give him space, which wouldn't have been a problem because the next corner is a left-hander and Magnussen would have been on the outside anyway. Magnussen would have starved to death on the outside anyway, but rather said, I'm going to cut you off. And that's how this collision happened. That means if you look at it honestly and soberly, both at fault. 50% one and 50% the other. What interests me now and what I don't. I can't answer exactly, but what I will certainly discuss with Niels Wittig the next time I see him with the race director is, if there is a 50-50 fault, can't you actually punish both of them? So you have to at least think about that, because one thing is clear, the two of them didn't just cause an accident through their respective behavior. They have insecurity, i.e. safety problems. Hülkenberg had an accident as a result. It wasn't his fault. Guan Yu Zhou drove through all the mud, which was also difficult, and the race was stopped. So maybe in future we shouldn't just say it's just a racing accident, but we should take them both by the scruff of the neck and then say, my dear friend A and my dear friend B. That's not what we mean by racing. But well, I'll discuss that with Niels Wittig. In any case, I haven't found a paragraph in the regulations for double fault.
That's definitely an exciting idea. But as I just said, they haven't even investigated it yet. Do you think they should have investigated it? Or did he perhaps subliminally imply that if we investigate it and punish him, then he'll probably be banned next time? We don't want to open that up now.
So, of course, it's obvious that you would think that. That's obvious, because then you've avoided banning a driver from the Grand Prix. But to be honest, I don't think that was the problem. I don't think that wanted to avoid the penalty, this disqualification from Magnussen's race. And I don't believe that at all. After all, the stewards are usually prepared to hand out tough penalties. And the FIA in particular has handed out really solid penalties in the past. It's not as if there's a little bit of that you are lousy at making such a decision. I don't believe that at all. Why was there no investigation? Well, I mean, if there had to or should have been an investigation, you could have said so at any time, both from the Red Bull side and as well as from the Haas side, just like it usually is. With every collision, with every impeding, the team managers immediately cry out and demand an investigation. That is then taken note of first. And if the severity or the intensity or the, I'll say, problem is recognized, then an investigation is carried out. It is logical that this is noted, i.e. taken note of, because it has been looked at very closely. And if you then say that there is no single culprit, then it's a racing accident.
Then we don't need an investigation. Let's put the on-track disputes to one side, both at Alpine and at Haas and Red Bull, and come back to our French squabblers, because the statements afterwards have added a little more spice. Among other things, Pierre Gasly said that Ocon ignored the team's instructions. They shouldn't have attacked each other, but rather supported each other. And Bruno Famin was really angry, as you just said. He threatened consequences. Tough decisions have to be made. You've already said what he should have done, or what you think he should have done. What do you think will happen?
So there, I'm going to say in the heat of the moment and with adrenaline and anger and emotions in the room, I would say that Bruno Famin made the right decision for the time being by saying that this will have consequences. Which ones? I'll think about it now. Because at the end of the day, as team boss, he has to make sure that his team is doing well so that he gets through the next Grand Prix well, yes, from one Grand Prix to the next, further and further, because that's what he's there for. Whether that works with or without Ocon or with any kind of penalty is something he has to think about very carefully, because Ocon's attitude is simply wrong for a team that is struggling to somehow get back on its feet. And that's why I believe that after sleeping on it for 2 or 3 nights, he needs to make a blatant decision so that he can finally put his mind at rest for the rest of the year. We still have an incredible number of races ahead of us in this situation, in this matter. And I just believe that the only language he understands is to sit out a race. Let's remember Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. The two of them clashed once in Barcelona, and then they were gone because they collided. What a stupid accident. And then Toto Wolff intervened relatively rigidly and said, you pay for your own damage. In other words, I think Rosberg had to pay $350,000 and Hamilton $450,000. Now you can say, if someone earns $20 or $30 or even $50 million, he doesn't care about $350,000. But it's different with Ocon. So a very severe financial penalty is also something that could work. A fine for Ocon would certainly be more sustainable.
Of course, Gasly and Ocon already have a bit of a history. They've clashed a few times and don't necessarily like each other very much. Have you ever experienced something like that with a teammate in your career? Experienced? And how did the team boss deal with it?
No, I was actually lucky. I had very tough teammates, but they were all actually clean. Nobody drove into my car just like that, so I didn't have to hope for any help from the team boss. Help from the team boss. Gasly has made his point, and he's right, of course. In this critical situation for Alpine, it's all about the team. And it's not just one driver who has to help. I mean, racing drivers are basically cut from the same cloth. It's not as if Gasly has never lashed out before. But in this situation, he behaved correctly, and it would have been smart for Ocon to queue up at the back and wait, even if waiting is a bit difficult in Monaco because nothing usually happens there.
Then I'd say let's leave it for now with all the collisions and arguments and see what our viewers want to know in our AskAvD section. We've been inundated with questions about the boredom of Monaco over the last few days since the race. But before we get to that, here's your opinion. Where would you put it on the excitement or boredom scale?
Yes, I would say it was typically boring. It was just a typical Monaco Grand Prix. And the question that always comes up, of course, and which was also raised by Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, is yes, so can we still race there at all? And do we need another track? And do we need this? Do we need that? Well, this question I can remember when I was driving there has already been asked, and this question was also asked in the 70s. What is this actually about? What do we want here? It's all far too cramped. So I would say you just have to live with it. The fact that it's now become such a slow train, they've moved incredibly slowly. I don't know, some people didn't even notice how slow it was. And Oscar Piastri said it was Formula 2 lap times that we were doing. Of course, that's because the one and the other go together because it's practically impossible to overtake. In other words, there's only one thing that counts in Monaco, and that's track position. Where you are means you stay there. And that's why it was clear from the start that no matter whether I set off on medium or hard tires after this collision, that was it. I stay on the track and finish. It's not as if it hasn't all happened before. I mean, I can remember a Mercedes duet where they were also driving at an absolute snail's pace. And then Jerome D'Ambrosio came along in I don't know what it was, a Mirage or something. I don't know what kind of car. The slowest car in the field and saw them all off. And was the fastest car in the field. So that's nothing new for Monaco either. Yes, Monaco is an anachronism. It's something that's not really contemporary at all.
But it's great. And yet let's listen to V Wavy's question because he asks, Mr. Danner, how fit for the future is Monaco as a Formula One circuit? What changes should be made to the circuit in order to create a respectable race again? Or should the Monaco Grand Prix be abolished for good, as it is simply no longer suitable for the modern generation of cars?
So that's a very good question, which we've just touched on a bit. Basically, I'm of the opinion that you should never abolish a circuit. Because of the generation of vehicles, the vehicles have to be tuned and adjusted to cope with this route, that in advance. The second thing is that in Monaco, of course, you can argue about what we should do here because the cars are so big, so wide, and so fast that I can't drive alongside them. But Monaco is a track that has a very special characteristic, namely that qualifying has to be right there, more than anywhere else. The fact that is different from what I'm saying now in Azerbaijan, or that it's different from Vegas or Jeddah circuit. That's just the way it is. In Formula One, there are not only the 0815 tracks as they were designed in modern Formula One, with huge Qatar, huge runoff areas, and you can actually drive anywhere, but there are also difficult tracks. Monaco. So yes, it was a strange race, as we've often seen. Whoever is in front stays in front, but it's just the specialty here in Monaco, so you have to make sure that you get it right in qualifying. Get it right. It only happens once a year.
And the nice and crazy thing about Monaco is that Saturday's qualifying was super spectacular and exciting, unlike Sunday. I think you were commentating the whole thing for RTL. It must have been great fun commentating this close qualifying session.
Yes, of course. I was at the track in Monaco on Friday, and I stood there in the swimming pool chicane and the tobacco bend because I wanted to get a feel for who was driving how. And you can see that very clearly in Monaco. You can really see who is sacrificing their last drop of blood for this issue. And Charles Leclerc was obviously prepared to take a risk, to take a big risk. He mastered that. He didn't go anywhere against it now in free practice. It's amazing to see a driver drive so well that he almost defies the laws of physics. And that is very fascinating. And with this impression, I was of course delighted to comment on qualifying because it's always a mixture. Driving aggressively is all well and good, but keeping this aggression against the track, against the curbs, against the lack of grip and so on under control in such a way that it still remains harmonious and smooth, that's an art, that's masterly. And Leclerc, fantastic. And we've also talked about our friend Piastri in this round several times, and it's just as fabulous. So the drivers did a great job there, and you don't see such an exciting qualifying session every day. And for that reason alone, I think you should stay in Monaco.
Then, to conclude this Monaco complex, perhaps the question, can we somehow solve the whole problem that there can be boring races when it's not raining, when there are no incidents? Is there somewhere we can rebuild the track? Or our other Christian came up with the crazy idea yesterday, hey, if we're going to rebuild it, let's do joker laps. 5 times in the race or so, everyone just has to drive a different route so that something comes in.
Yes, there are plenty of fun ideas, but the realistic idea is to think about changing the course somewhere. I'm sure that will be discussed, but it's an issue that needs to be discussed between the Monaco Automobile Club, the FIA, and of course the GPDA, the Drivers' Association. I would say that it would be possible to change the track a little, to change the layout a little, but that would involve a lot of extra work, and of course the Monaco Automobile Club and the Monaco State would have to play along. They have to pay for it. To what extent this is realistic, we will see. There would be the possibility of adding 1 or 2 sections to the track and perhaps make the whole thing a bit more overtaking friendly, because that's what it's all about.
Well, let's just keep our fingers crossed that we find a good solution, because Monaco belongs on the racing calendar.
Yes, excuse me if I say something about that again. Monaco is just a yes, it's not up to date. It has never been contemporary, it's always crazy. And what we've seen is incredibly special, and I simply like, or really don't like, this kind of standardization that everything is always the same. No, tracks should be special, should be specific, should be difficult, and in this case Monaco is incredibly difficult, and it has its own peculiarities and idiosyncrasies and of course different priorities than perhaps Qatar.
That's the way it is. And now let's just keep looking, because we saw in Monaco that things didn't go perfectly for Red Bull there either. The alarm bells are ringing a bit, and Max Verstappen himself said after the race that we didn't deserve the podium today. The competition is catching up. Was that a small dip in form specific to the track, or do we now have really serious opponents for Red Bull with Ferrari and McLaren?
Ferrari's strength in Monaco was somewhat predictable. We've already discussed the fact that McLaren are now right at the front, and we've also clearly defined that here. They are on an equal footing with both drivers. That's very, very important to note, because a Piastri and a Norris against a Verstappen is almost impossible for Verstappen to manage, even if it's a normal race. Yes, I think the competition has caught up. It's obviously the case that the Red Bull had a few particular weaknesses, which it may still have at one track or another. And so I'm going to say slowly, there probably won't be a second time. But when it's the competition's turn, Red Bull is, of course, also Red Bull is not forced to drive to the front like this, but to really push to the limit. You can't make a mistake with the strategy. You always have to, let me say, the last few tenths, they don't come naturally. You have to work for them, and that is very exciting. It's no longer a walk in the park for Red Bull. From here on, I think you can say that quite clearly.
You can see that when we look at the figures in the championship standings, only 1 and 30 points, so only in quotation marks in the Drivers' Championship, 24 in the Constructors' Championship. For the latter in particular, it would obviously be good to have 2 drivers at the front, but with Perez, the enthusiasm of the first races has slowly waned again.
Yes, look, Perez did it last year, that's how you put it. Actually had more of a psychological problem last year, that he no longer believed in himself. And that's why the team supported him so well and didn't just put him in the corner with a broomstick, but kept encouraging him, and we know what he can do. And Christian Horner also said in Monaco, yes, to come back to the accident, yes, it's not Perez's fault at all, Magnussen should be banned. Yes, of course he says that because he obviously wants to show his driver Perez a bit of respect. In absorbent cotton, we don't want him to fall into another slump like he did in the middle of last year. And I would say, let's forget Monaco. That was really not good from Perez. And then let's see how he performs in Canada. Replacing him is practically impossible also with regard to the World Championship. Next year is another matter. We can talk about that. But I think now Red Bull just has to try and make life as easy as possible for Perez so that he can get back to his normal form.
In other words, overall, we can say that we might be in for a more exciting World Cup than we perhaps thought at the start of the season.
I'm 100% sure that this will be a really difficult year for Red Bull compared to last year. And Verstappen, of course, has what it takes to pull it off anyway, thanks to his extra class. But it won't be easy to shake off the 2 youngsters who are now hot on his heels at McLaren.
Of course, there are also exciting things on the AVD Histo Tour. And if you're wondering what it's all about and what Christian Danner has to do with it, then take a look at this little clip. Christian, that looks really spectacular, doesn't it?
Yes, it's also great because, of course, it's a competition, but it's such a gentle thing. Lots of driving, really great routes. And I have to be honest, of course, I'm also very happy that I can drive a BMW M3 because at least I know the car. And it's comfortable because you drive between 7 and 8 hours a day. So I was particularly pleased that the car was made available to me.
This is your first time taking part. What are you looking forward to the most?
Well, the rides. Of course, they are wonderful because the area is beautiful. But to be honest, of course, I'm looking forward to the racetracks the most. And Spa, Nürburgring and Zolder are all great, of course. I know them all by heart. I'm looking forward to them the most.
Exactly. For anyone who may not yet know what the AVD Histo Tour is, the whole thing takes place at the beginning of August, from the 7th to the 9th. It starts at the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit, then to the Spa-Francorchamps roller coaster in Zolder, and back to the Nordschleife for the grand finale. And Christian, as I said before, is a real fan of the BMW M3 from 1987.
And we discuss, and of course we discuss Formula One. That's very important. It's part of it.
You can really enjoy driving these classic cars or youngtimers. The year of construction is up to the year 2002.
Yes, exactly.
Approved. And anyone interested, you are welcome to register until June 16th of 2024. The link and more information can be found in the description of this video or at avdhistotour.de, and it should perhaps be a bit more entertaining on Sunday than in Monaco, or what do you think?
Yes, I'm sure it will be. It was always one of my favorite tracks when I was racing. It was one of my absolute favorite tracks when I was commentating on site, and I'm already looking forward to it again because it's simply a very special atmosphere. It also has a very special course, a special characteristic. You can also say, is it still up to date, the chicanes and the proximity to the wall? And let's remember, there have often been crashes. I think it's great. You have to be prepared for it. Something completely different from Monaco and also something completely different from, I don't know, Azerbaijan.
I'm definitely looking forward to the marmots. And finally, after you guessed so well last time with McLaren, who do you see as the favorites for Montreal this time?
Well, both McLaren are clearly in front again. Verstappen is in front and the Ferrari, let's see. Yes. So it all belongs together again. I don't believe that a Leclerc's driving effort that he showed in Monaco, the technical weaknesses that are still there at Ferrari this time in Montreal, I think that will be more difficult. But they're definitely in the race, and don't forget the weather. It's sometimes a bit changeable there too.
We're definitely looking forward to it and say see you next time. Ciao. Ciao.
Whatever the topic, if you have a question or two for me, use the hashtag AskAvD.